Thanks to everyone who joined us today for the Cultivating Success Sustainable Small Farms Education webinar. Our topic today is irrigation considerations for the small acreage farm or ranch. The Cultivating Success program was established in 2000 by University of Idaho Extension, the Washington State University Food Systems Program, and the Small Farms nonprofit Rural Roots. This is our fourth season of doing webinars. So just a couple tips if this is the first webinar that you've joined us on. If you could close the other programs running on your computer, that could help with your bandwidth. We're all sharing so much internet speed these days. However, if you do have some problems, go ahead and type into the chat. Mackenzie and I are going to be on standby to help you. At any time, you can type in questions for our speaker into the Q&A box. You will find both the chat and the Q&A box in the control bar at the bottom of your screen. This webinar is being recorded, and the webinar and the slide handout will be available on the Cultivating Success website tomorrow, and I will show you where at the end of today's webinar. With those few tips, I want to introduce today's presenter, Karie Boone. Karie is an extension educator in small farms and food systems, and she is located in Payette County. She has a wealth of information about water for small farming and ranching, and today she's going to be talking to us about irrigation. I'm Colette D. Phelps. I'm a community food systems area educator located on the Moscow campus. I will be your moderator today. And again, we have Mackenzie Lawrence standing by for technical assistance. So please type your questions into the Q&A box, any technical assistance, or perhaps to introduce yourself to others on today in the chat box. With that, welcome Karie, and I'm going to turn the webinar over to you.
All right, great. All right, I just plugged in my headphones, so hopefully you all can still hear me.
Yes, we can.
Good. Okay, I'm going to share the screen here. All right. Still look good, Colette?
It looks good. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. I want to just kind of go over irrigation assessment. So if you're just starting a small acreage farm or ranch, or you've had some seasons under your belt, but you're still trying to figure out your irrigation system, I'm going to go over figuring out where your irrigation water is coming from, your options for that. What are the different processes for legally accessing irrigation water in Idaho? So not just sticking your hose in the river that runs by your property, unless you have a permit for that. And then what about the delivery methods? How are you going to get that water from your ditch or your well onto your actual crops or to your livestock? And that's going to depend on really what's best for you and your operation. And so I'll go over how to decide which option is best for you. And we'll be focusing mostly on flood, sprinkler, and drip systems for that portion. So I'm going to go through the first part, kind of looking at the first 2 points there, and then I'll stop for a little break and see if there are any questions, and then we'll go into the irrigation delivery. So go ahead and you can always put your questions into chat, or if you want to wait and ask directly, we'll have a moment for that about halfway through, and then of course at the end as well. So to get going, starting from the top, where's your irrigation water coming from? Do you have a well set up? Are you working off an irrigation ditch with your head gates? Are you pumping directly from a particular river? Are you getting it from municipalities? Some small acreages, market gardeners are really working with the municipal water. And so if you've got that municipal water, you've really got it easy in terms of access, because basically the municipality manages all of the rights and such for you. So you don't have a lot to worry about in terms of legal access, except, and it can be really nice to be on city water if you're really small scale. It's clean. You can wash your produce without treatment. It's not possible to wash your your post-harvest with ditch water, and it sort of depends with the well water. So if you've got your municipal water set up and that's what you're using, great. For everybody else, you do have, if you haven't done it already, there is a legal process that you have to go through to appropriate water from a ditch, a well, or a river. And so that usually goes through the Idaho Department of Water Resources, and you get some sort of water right. So in Idaho, all waters are public waters, but they are administered by the state, the entity, the Idaho Department of Water Resources. And so to divert those public waters, you do have to put them to a particular use, and you have to basically justify that use and how much you're going to be using, when and where. And this is all based on a system that's developed in Idaho and the West called prior appropriation. Since the beginning of statehood, it's been around. And so there is a very diligent process for making sure everyone gets the water that they're supposed to get and for the right thing. And then if you're with an irrigation district, the irrigation district or company holds those rights in trust to use for land in their district. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And it's usually only for irrigation, sometimes municipal, but it's usually just for irrigation and stock water. So real quick, sort of give you the background on what is a water right, because it's really the foundation of farming in a lot of parts of Idaho. And so each water right has these various elements. So priority date, quantity, point of diversion, place of use, purpose of use, and season of use. So there's a lot of administration that goes into making sure you're getting the water you need, when you need it, where you need it. And in times of shortage, which we don't, even in southern Idaho, we haven't seen a lot of water cut off very significantly. So, but in times of shortage, there is a first in time, first in right. And so that's part of that prior appropriation administration system where whoever started using that water first, who had that water right, some of them starting back in the mid 1800s, they're going to have first priority to that water in times of shortage. So if the reservoirs are low, if you have a newer water right, say you got yours and your water right happens to be dated 1970s or 80s, those people that have been holding on to those older water rights or senior water rights, those are going to have priority over a more junior right in times of shortage. And that can be a really big kick in the pants if you don't know that that's what happens, because you might end up getting your water shut off when you're expecting to, get your business going and water your crops or water your animals. And so that's just something to keep in mind there. And so as we go into different sources of water, again, even the groundwater, not just surface waters, are in the state are declared to be property of the state. So they're the ones administrating it. And there's a few different kinds of wells. There's a basic irrigation well and a domestic well. And so the irrigation well, again, you need a water right for it. You need approval before drilling. This application takes usually 3 to 4 months. If you don't know what if you have a well on your property, you're not sure how it's categorized, the history, you can go online to the Idaho Department of Water Resources website, and they actually have a pretty great, easy to use database where you can put your address, or if you even have a well number here, and it'll bring up your well log and give you the history, what it's categorized for, because it can also be categorized as a domestic well, which is the second kind of well that you can still irrigate with. It's just a little bit more restricted. They're intended to be for within, a half acre of your house, basically, but you can irrigate up to a half acre and use a total of 13,000 gallons per day. So if you're on a small scale and don't plan on going larger than this quantity, that is going to be one of the easier options for you, because you don't actually need a water right. You just apply for a permit, a construction permit, and you're sort of free to go on that, and they don't record. There's not a lot of data gathering around how much you're using, and every day, logging with the irrigation districts and stuff like that. So smaller is better in this case, but if you are going larger and you need more than water than that, you go with the irrigation well. And so just in terms of that irrigation well, if you don't already have one in place and you're trying to figure out your options, they can.
Karie, I just lost your sound. Mackenzie, did you also experience losing Karie's sound?
I also did, yes.
Okay. So let's give that a second. Sorry, everyone. I'm going to double check and see if we lost her connection. I believe we lost her connection. Karie, you might consider unmuting and trying your sound on your laptop. So, Karie, do you know that we cannot hear you? That would be good if you could let us know. I see that you unmuted.
Karie, if you can navigate back to your...
Hello, can you hear me?
It is breaking apart.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, my phone just completely dropped me. I'm sorry. I'm not sure why that happened. So I am back, and I think I should just go forward here, as long as you can hear me okay with my computer microphone. Is it coming in okay?
It is coming in okay. Thanks. And
okay. Sorry, everybody, about that. I don't know why my phone just dropped me. The technology sagas continue. So I was talking about putting in a well, and some of you might have already found out this information, but it is quite expensive to drill a new well and get everything set up. So, I mean, for example, in Southwest Idaho, depending on how deep you want to go, you're looking upwards of $30,000 to drill a new well. And so you want to really take that into consideration for, you're looking at your budget for your business, if that's worth it for you. All right, so those are the well situation. And again, going to the Idaho Department of Water Resources website to find out more information on your well. There's a link right there, and this will be posted up on the website after. Now, if you are thinking about or already using a ditch or canal system, there's a little bit different of a process. So you either need a water right or a water share to divert or pump water. And the first step is really figuring out which district or company manages the water in your area. There's only one that's gonna be responsible for the ditches in your area. So this is like if you're from the east or from somewhere other than the west, where you might have just been able to use whatever water's running by your property. It's really different here. All water use is accounted for in Idaho, because we are, in some parts of the state, are quite arid. And so going to your irrigation district or company is the very first step. And so these images you're seeing right now these are from Southwest Idaho. And these are the irrigation district maps. So you can find these, usually you can Google it. They should be on your county website if they have it sort of together. And if they don't have one posted or you can't find one, you can contact just sort of any irrigation district that you can find the number for, and they'll know who is supposed to be providing you irrigation service. And so you can see on the right side, it says Canyon County, Idaho. Those are different colors, represent different service areas and different irrigation districts that are in charge of those areas. And so each one of those has their own rules, regulations, norms. And so that's why it's so important that you contact them, because it's really different. Even within the same county, you can have very different fees and rules. And so you want to figure out who your irrigation district is and go ahead, and the best thing is go down and talk with them, let them know your situation. So they're a really important part of agriculture in our state, at least in the South. I understand in the North that they're not quite as prevalent, but they own the water rights and distribute the water to most farmers down in southern Idaho. And usually how it works is you buy into shares, and I'll talk about those in a minute. These companies and districts own the diversion facilities and infrastructures, and so they also maintain that for you. And there's quite a bit of maintenance every year that goes into that. And that's where your assessment fees go, along with the administration of the rights. You help pay for, everyone who's part of that district help pays for the maintenance of the canals and ditch system. And so they're an important, very important key player in water access for our farms and ranches. So for the water shares, it's kind of like paying for a portion of a pool of water rights that's owned by the irrigation district. So they're a little different from water rights. So you're buying into this pool of water rights, but the company themselves hold those. And so you're buying shares in that. So you can then divert from those irrigation canals, and you do pay assessments. This was another thing that seemed to be a surprise to a lot of people. You do have to pay assessments for the maintenance of that infrastructure. I'm kind of reiterating that as a part of the process. So I want to stop right there real quick and see if there's any questions on those legal aspects and the water access components.
We do have a couple of questions. The first question is, if I just bought a small farm, am I grandfathered into previous owner's water rights?
So as with a lot of these water-related questions, it does depend. So usually you would get some sort of decree of water rights when you buy the place. So it should be in your, I just blanked on the term. What's the term when you buy a house?
In your deed?
Deed, thank you. It should be deeded to you. And so if it's not deeded to you, then that's where you go, depending, is it a well or a irrigation ditch that we're talking about?
Dwayne didn't specify, so Dwayne, if you could let us know if that is a well or a ditch. He did have a follow-up question. He said it's a well. He has both a well and a pond. So
Ooh, okay.
for the
Yep.
pond,
So
he's wondering if that's managed by the state. It's a third of an acre pond, and then he also has a well.
okay. Yep. So with the wells, I would go to that website that I mentioned in the slide. There's a link on that, Idaho Department of Water Resources well log, and put in your address and pull up the information on that well and figure out what's the history, who's the owner. And from there, you'll probably generate a number of questions, which you then want to call the Idaho Department of Water Resources about to make any clarifications. In terms of the pond, you might also find that there is a permit for that on your property. Again, the Department of Water Resources is the person to talk to about that. I'm surprised you wouldn't have gotten something in the deed that explained that, but I guess it doesn't always get transferred. And so you do need permission, essentially, to have a pond of a certain size. And I wrote down that quantity somewhere because this is not the first person that's asked, but it's there's a certain quantity that's legal to have a pond without basically permission from the state. And so you can ask them as well on the size of those. So each region, depending on what region you're in, has a representative in that region from the Department of Water Resources. So you can look up those specific contacts for your region, and that would be the person that you would want to call.
Great, thank you. We have another question, and this is, can you collect rainwater for use on your property?
Yeah, it's interesting. I know it seems funny, right? We just think well, in Colorado, that was always an issue. And so whenever I get this question, I'm like, you must know something or have lived in Colorado or something. In Colorado, there was a law that you could not collect rainwater. The rivers were over appropriated to all of the different uses, from farmers to municipal uses. And so people were not, that rainwater was already spoken for. And so you had to let it drain into whatever water source it was going into. We do not have that same law in Idaho, so that's not an issue. So yes, you can collect rainwater.
Great, thank you. And then a second question is, what is the average cost of using the water district water?
Oh man, it really depends. So it depends. Sometimes there's biannual assessments. Sometimes there's you get either 1 or 2 assessments a year. It really depends. I think the one, say, I've talked with some people or on some properties over in like the Payette region, and they're looking at like $150 a year, which is nothing for the amount of water that you end up getting. But it really does vary by region, and often they do it by the number of shares that you request, so the amount of water that you need. So I don't have a very concrete answer for you on that one.
Well, thank you, Karie. Those were all the questions that came in so far.
Great. Good questions, everybody. Keep them coming. I'm happy to answer them the best I can. So once you have the administrative side of things figured out, the next, you have your water rights, your shares. The water leaves the reservoir, headed to your canal system, or maybe it's already in your well, and ultimately gets to either your head gate or the aquifer. Your well's pulling from the aquifer, and then how that happens if you're on a ditch is the gate is open and closed by a ditch rider. You have to call in your order to the irrigation company or district, the quantity that you want. The ditch rider adjusts the gate. And again, if there's plenty of water, some ditch companies kind of allow you to have a lot of freedom in how much you take. In other cases, they're real strict about it, and they'll put, it might be, and sometimes if it's a time of water scarcity, there may be a padlock on the gate. And then the ditch rider is the one that keeps track of how much you're taking and for how many days. So this person, ditch rider, you might know him or her already. They kind of, they move along the ditch and open and close the gates and keep track. They're like the accounting system for water in your region. They're very important people to know and to make sure that they like you and that you have good relationships with. They're the ones you want to take cookies to on Christmas. They can really be an asset to your operation. And they can help with disputes with your neighbors. And they know how much each person is getting in terms of volume of water. So great people to know. And so then once you get it into your ditch, or you're bringing it out of your well, you do have options for delivery systems and how you're going to get that water on to your crop or to your livestock And so I wanted to go over a few options, and then I will give you plenty of resources to further investigate on each of these. So starting with flood, you can use hose, siphon tubes, gated pipes. You can, the sprinkler systems, there's various options for hand lines, wheel lines, pods, big guns, and then with the drip irrigation. And so the flood irrigation is sort of suited to relatively level uniform fields. These are going to be your simple, low capital investment, but higher labor options. When you look at the sprinkler systems, you do get a lot more control over timing and amount. They might match the needs better of a particular crop. They're good at applying more uniformly. You do get some efficiency loss from wind drift, and it can potentially increase disease in some plants. You think about, mold or various other diseases. Some plants just don't want water on their leaves, and so in that case, you might consider the other options. And you also want to make sure if you're in all options, but particularly with the sprinklers, you want to test your groundwater, because sometimes they have high salinity and it can require special systems so that you don't clog the nozzles. So that's a consideration too. The drip is also great because it's very targeted. It's a low flow pressure system. It can be really great for small scale production. And it really reduces the amount of water that you're using, which can also decrease your energy costs as well as your water costs, depending on where they're coming from. But it does have a high initial cost and quite a bit of labor at the beginning to get you set up. So which irrigation delivery system is right for you? And so as I go, I'm going to go in through a little bit more detail on each of these. And let's see, what's my time? How much time do I have left?
You have another 30 minutes, Karie.
Okay, good, thank you. So when you're looking at your irrigation delivery system and which one's right for you, you really want to think about your personal goals and resources. So what's your budget? How much time and labor are you willing to invest? And what volume of water or shares do you have accessible to you? And so be thinking about these as we move through, because drip irrigation might seem really amazing, but if you don't have the labor to set it up, or likewise with the flood irrigation is really a great entry-level option, but if you don't have an irrigation ditch or irrigation water access, it's going to be a little bit harder. So other considerations have to do with your particular operation in terms of your target crops. So again, you don't want, a sprinkler isn't going to like, or excuse me, tomatoes and zucchini aren't going to like having water on their leaves, for example. So depending on the type of crop, you might cater your decision on which delivery system to use. The water availability, when and how much water you can get, and how does that match your crop's water needs. Water quality, your veggie of choice may not like water with high salinity, and so that's something to consider, as well as using, if you want to be able to use your water source to wash your vegetables post-harvest, you can't really use ditch water for that. So think about that. And then your soil type, in general, for example, you irrigate clay soils for longer periods of time with lower application rates. And so you might be, if you have more clay soil, drip might be a good option. And then with sandy or rocky soils, you want to irrigate for a shorter period. And then because, like the finer soil particles like clay hold water longer than the coarse soils like sands. So clay soils have this lower intake rate. And so you want to have that slow application and make sure it gets direct all the way down to the roots. And so so obviously the size, shape, and slope of your property. If you have if you're trying to farm on a steep slope, the the flood option may not be great for you, because these really, if you want it to water uniformly, you need to have a pretty flat field. So also with most of these, you do need corrugation. So you need to either know someone with a corrugator or have one yourself. Siphon tubes are sort of the kind of a little bit more old school, but still really effective. They come in different sizes. You do different sets for 12 or 24 hours. So you set one set of rows and then you move them over. The tubes can plug if water, and then it can be sort of labor intensive. You got to go out and plug them. But they're very affordable, very flexible. It's pretty simple. You don't need pumps or expensive equipment. It wastes about 60% of water, but does recharge, waste in quotes, because it does in a sense recharge the aquifer in that way, as it feeds down into the groundwater. So a little bit, high labor, low cost on this one. Really similar with the the gated pipe. Still need that uniform field. These can be used a little bit better with the irregular surfaces, but I'm sorry. What I meant to say is, if you have really long fields with irregular surfaces, it can actually make the water distribution a little bit more difficult to get it all the way to the end. You just don't have the pressure to get it out. So, and then you can kind of decipher what size piping and gates you need. It's kind of like both an art and a science, and this is where you really want to get an irrigation specialist in your region to help you out, either at one of the local irrigation stores. Some extension offices can offer some help. But yeah, so this is another option. It's a little bit more controllable than the pipes. You can open and close those gates on there to the desired flow rate. And then that other picture, that's the filter. You need filters for henceforth on all of these all the following options. You do need to filter out the water. You can see in that circle, the outside, that's all the dirt and debris that's come out of the ditch water. And you want to get that out before it goes through your gates, or if you're going into a sprinkler systems in particular. So with the sprinkler options, I like to throw this one out there because some people are starting small market gardens, and this might be the size that you really need right now. It might be something really simple that you hook up to a garden hose and you move around as needed around your beds, and that's totally fine. You've got to figure out what's best for your needs and your operation. So in general with sprinklers, there's various options, right? You can kind of move up in complexity. You can even get these little mini guns that will automatically be pulled through your field. So they're a little bit more automated. They have a motor on there. These are the hand lines. So these are the metal hand lines, and these are what I like to call the character building option, because they do, you get those metal pipes full of water, and then you got to move them on your field, and they're still full of water. And so they can get a little bit of more labor intensive than the smaller gun here, but they do a really good job of uniformly getting water out on your crop or your pasture. So, and then they also have a PVC option, which might be a little bit more manageable, and you don't have to use a backhoe. With the metal one, for the risers, you got to put in. You do need a backhoe to get those down. So it's a little bit more of an investment, but a little more permanent. Pretty sturdy, those ones. So, but yeah, you can do the lightweight PVC hand lines there too. So with the metal hand lines, though, you don't have in contrast to the flood, you don't have to have the corrugates. You do get a more even application pattern. You use less water overall. And so you do get your workout. I think I mentioned, they're still more affordable. You might need I should say with most sprinklers, you do need pressurized systems. So if you think about, most garden hoses are between like 35 and 65 psi. That's on the lower end. That won't necessarily power your metal hand lines, so you likely need a bigger pump, and there's a lot of considerations for that. So again, this is another one of it depends on what you're doing. So how much water do you want to move? What's your power source? What number of sprinklers and what type of sprinklers are you trying to use? But I think the key takeaway here is just don't just go to D&B and pick up a pump off the rack. You might be sorry, and it's just going to cause you a lot more of a headache. You want to do your research and then talk with the manufacturer to ensure that you selected the best pump for your context. And I do have resources at the end to help get you going on this. But yeah, you just got to choose the most efficient pump for your purposes. So let's see. And again, the screen situation, you're always going to want to filter your water. I had one, let's see, I went out to one person's property that had a pretty large pump to move water, like 160 feet, I think it was. And they were trying to irrigate, it's about 3.5 acres of pasture. And they had to have a power pole put in, a transformer, special filter, and have it all installed and get the power people out there and everything. And it was about $8,500 for that. Yeah, just another thing to consider as you're planning out your budget and your business and stuff. But you can get that's for, larger. I think it's sort of admitted they probably overdid it, but if you're doing a smaller deal with like, just a smaller, like a small gun or something like that. And then this is, larger pasture. The wheel lines, you might see them often as you're driving around the countryside. These ones are like a side roll sprinkler. They're basically an aluminum pipe with then equally spaced sprinklers, and they've got the big wheels that elevate them up. So they have a gas powered motor in the middle and kind of drives the whole system. And then you do still have to have that pressurized supply pipeline. So these are going to be really mostly good for like pretty standard shaped fields, like square and rectangular fields, like short grain crops, hay, grass. Pretty good. They do have pretty good water efficiency with about 70%. So that's kind of nice on water savings. And they tend to be well, you still get the wind loss, and you do have to fence out animals, or because cattle can cause some costly repairs on that. But you still get that, nice even application, and it's quite a bit less labor than some of the other options because it's all mechanized. But also more expensive, and you do got to get the maintenance, someone to come out probably and do the maintenance. So the other option, especially for pastures, are the K-pods, I've heard them called. They cover a really similar diameter as hand lines. But they're really catered towards if you don't want to have to put in a lot of infrastructure, because they use common hoses and fittings. It's not as industrial, if you will. It's really designed for small acreage pastures. It's a very practical choice. And depending on your pressure, you might still need a pump. But the planning and sizing of these systems does need to be done with the dealer, because they'll go through the whole process with you. And I think the maximum pod length you can get is about 400 feet across. And then you can see that guy on there with the right on, and he's pulling them along. You can move them by pulling them along. So it's really nice to have a good four-wheeler with this setup. Or if you just want to ride around on the four-wheeler, you should probably get some of these to give you an excuse. All right, so, and then the guns, I mentioned those at the beginning. So you can get the really big, they're called big guns, basically. They require really high operating pressure. So that's where those pumps come in. They can be from like 80 to 150 PSI. So that will increase your cost in terms of using a pump for that. So that's a consideration. But they're basically a large sprinkler mounted on a cart, and you can either move it with a tractor. Some of them have automated movements, like I should see over the picture here. Mini guns, yeah, that is a little minigun. And so those kind of move, they're automated on their own, and you just put them like at the head of a row, and it'll pull that sprinkler back towards the machine. So really the similar issues with all the sprinkler systems. You need a pump. It is pretty, in this case, they are pretty easy in terms of installation, but they do have, and they have more even watering, but they are still susceptible to that wind. So, and so moving on to the drip, this is really the way I've seen a lot of smaller acreage crop farmers move, because it relies on a lower pressure system, so less need for a pump and less energy. You get really high water efficiency because the water drips directly into the root system. And my favorite part is the weeds. You're going to have less weed germination between the rows, because like with the sprinkler and the other options, you're watering everything, including the weeds. And so in this case, you get to really target, and you have quite a decrease in those weeds. So some of the challenges are the orifices in there, like the where the water comes out can get plugged. When you overwinter, you got to pull them up. The gopher, you got to store them, and the gophers can get into them. The rodents can get into them. But it's a lot less physical labor once they're installed. There's quite a bit at the beginning to get it all set up. You'll have to do quite a bit of research to figure out what options are right for your crop as well as your field setup. So once you get it done, though, it's just basically cleaning the filters that get clogged up. You can get holes. You might have to replace some parts throughout the season. But it's a lot less lifting of heavy things. So let's see what time we got here. Okay, I want to leave plenty of time for questions, so I'll try and end here in the next few minutes. I really want to do a webinar on just irrigation scheduling, of how much water and when. It's really an entire course, not even just a webinar. So I just want to give you a brief big picture perspective, and then I will direct you to some more specific resources that will be posted on at the end of this, that are going to be posted on the website. So as you're thinking about how much water and when, thinking about your soils and what your water holding capacity, how much infiltration and drainage you have, thinking about the particular crop and its rooting depth and the evapotranspiration, so how much water is your plant giving off. And then also the weather in your region, and wind and precip are super important in terms of, how, you're not going to need to water as much, obviously, if it rains. If you have, down here we get southwest Idaho, we get about an average of 11 inches a year. So yeah, you're not going to grow a whole lot. And so you think about like a typical pasture needs about 33 inches of irrigation, of water. And so there's that discrepancy. So that will impact how much water you put on. And with all of this, if you talk to long-term farmers or ranchers in your region, they've gone through a lot of trial and error and have a lot of experience. And at this point, might just go on the feel, like what do they think needs to happen. So once you start getting your system figured out, it will pay off. You'll get to a point over the years to where you can just sort of know when when you need to water, or maybe you feel the soil just with your bare hands and can tell, okay, yeah, I need to water in 2 days or something. So anyway, talks more about that in the publications and the resource packet at the end. So another thing considerations here is how deep you have to water. And this is when I mentioned the rooting depths. And so each plant has their various rooting depths. As you can see, alfalfa, such long roots. And and so you want to figure out what your actual rooting depth is on the plants that you have. And then your irrigation timing and amounts are best determined by that root zone soil moisture. And most water is absorbed through those roots in the first 1 to 2 feet. So, I'm sorry. Yes, it does depend, but that's sort of a standard. So most water is going to be absorbed in that upper root system. So, and so in addition to the roots, there's also the type of soil, and it really gets into the physical soil characteristics that you have. So I mentioned sort of at the beginning that, the clay is going to want to be watered for a longer amount of time at a slower flow. And so finer soils that have like a higher percentage of silt and clay particles, they're going to hold the water for longer as well, more so than the coarse sandy soils here. And I don't even know if you can see my pointer there, but and then they're also going to move water. Those finer soils are also going to move water more laterally than a sandy soil. As you can see that clay image there, how it goes wide like that. So that's water is also, it's not going to go as deep, it's going to go more wide compared to the sand. It's going to go real deep right below into the roots. And so and so I sort of mentioned assessing the soil moisture content. And so this can be done by a few different methods that are outlined in some of the resource, but you can also just, work towards getting to that feel method where you can go out there and feel your soil and know, when it needs to be watered. So again, I'd love to do a whole webinar on this, and maybe I will do that next year. But for now, the summary is to, 1, figure out where your water is coming from and what type of legal administration is needed. If you have the municipal water supply, that makes everything pretty easy for you. If you just need small quantities of water or you're willing to pay the municipal rates, which can be higher. If you're out of the river, the well, or the irrigation ditch, then you got to go through some of those processes that I mentioned, and importantly, to know your irrigation district and talk with them directly. Don't be embarrassed if you don't know, what the answer is or what you're supposed to be doing. That's why they're there. That's why you pay those assessment fees. I think this presentation will help you to have the language that you at least can start to go and have, the language to talk with them and ask the questions that you need answered. Because if you're new to that sort of world, it can be a little intimidating, and you might not even know what questions you have. So hopefully this has been useful in getting you to where you can go and figure that stuff out. And then choosing your delivery system that both matches your budget and your physical abilities, your crops needs, the water quality you have available to you, soil type, and the topography of your area. And then I really just want to emphasize to get expert help in choosing and installing your irrigation system. It can help save you quite a bit of heartache and potentially quite a bit of time and money. And so find out who your local irrigation specialist is at a local irrigation company, or some extension offices do offer support with that. So here are the resources. If you're looking for your well diggers report, your irrigation map, Idaho Department of Water Resources, and so on. And then here's a little bit more on the delivery systems. And then here's something on the types of soil that you have and what that means for your irrigation application. All right. What kind of questions we got?
Great, thank you. We do have a couple questions that came in. One that came in is asking, is there legal recourse for capricious behavior by gatekeepers? And this is like looking at the water, the folks that are controlling those irrigation head gates, say for exploitation for personal priorities.
Whoa. That's a loaded question. So you're talking about the ditch riders? Is that what you mean? Gatekeepers is the person that opens and closes the head gate?
Yes, that's when this question came in.
Okay. Yeah, I know. I've heard some complaints, and this is why from the beginning you just really want to try and get on their good side. And I would say the first step is going to be going into that irrigation district office and trying to negotiate the situation. They also really love their ditch riders because they're coveted, because it's a very skilled job. It's very hard. You work long hours. In the irrigation, especially in the irrigation system, they're just 24/7 on, no days off. And the entire irrigation infrastructure, both delivery system and all, depends on that one person. So they are very powerful. And so I would say to go ahead and try to go into the irrigation district with an empathetic, with some empathy, I should say, and then figure out if there's any solutions to it, whatever the issues are that you're having. If nothing happens over the season with that route, and offering the ditch rider a drink and a chat doesn't work either, because sometimes just those really basic, social things can work, then I would say the next step would be to contact the Idaho Department of Water Resources and see if they can offer you any guidance on that.
Thank you. That's a sticky situation. Thanks for those
Yes.
ideas, Karie.
Yes.
Okay, the next question is there a good resource to understand the filters that you were showing? And I think this question came in when you had the headgate filter, like the round cement filter.
Yeah. In some of the resources I have, let's see, they talk about the screens based on the type of irrigation. So depending on, drip, in each of these you can look and scan in there, and they'll talk about the types of screens you need. In this one, the Thompson and Beilich, they have a few. Well, not so much the Thompson, that's really broad, but the Beilich, they talk a bit about it based on each type of delivery system. And then I think, once you decide which type to go with, probably the best option is going to be talking to that business about, what's the best way to filter the water, because it does really vary also depending on what's the composition of your water and what needs to be filtered out. So I would start here with these resources and then go to wherever you're buying your infrastructure from.
Yeah, thank you for those resources. A couple of other resources that you might find in your communities is if you contact your local soil and water conservation district. They may have some resources that are very specific to water in your area. And the same would be for your Natural Resource Conservation Service office, your local office. And you'll definitely want to also check to see if you would qualify for any cost share programs with the NRCS EQIP program. So those are a couple places you might follow up locally. We have one additional question that has come in, and this question is, in Idaho, can you pump into a tank on higher elevation and gravity feed your irrigation system?
Yes, you can, and I wish I knew I had the quantities just memorized, but I don't. There's a certain size of tank that you can pump into without needing a special permit, and so you'd want to just figure out what that size is, and that would then be your local Idaho Department of Water Resources person. Or if you're coming out of a ditch, you could also contact your ditch company on that.
Yes. And in North Idaho, I have seen a couple different operations that are solar pumps that are pumping out of either a spring or a pond to higher elevation and then gravity feeding. Specifically for livestock operations, I've seen this, and those programs have received a cost share for installing them through the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which is the NRCS EQIP program. So again, that might be a good option for you if you're thinking that you need to hold water to see what infrastructure cost share might be available to you. Another question just came in, Karie. Are there good avenues to find used irrigation supplies, say hand lines or wheel lines?
I am not aware of a particular business. I have talked with different producers that buy them from their neighbors. Their neighbors will upgrade or change, move from, the corrugates to the sprinkler and decide, and then try and sell their piping and tubing and stuff for the gated pipe, for example. And so that's the only one I know of. That's the only way I know of to get the used. I wouldn't be surprised if there were businesses that resold the irrigation infrastructure. I just don't know of one in my area in Southwest Idaho. I would like to know if someone on here knows, please let it be known now.
I'm not, well, in Moscow, you might be able to find something like that at Karie, which does do a lot of salvage. Another option might be to look on Craigslist because people may be listing things for sale there, or on Facebook Marketplace. Also, a number of people are part of Facebook groups. And then finally, the nonprofit organization Rural Roots, their website is ruralroots.org, does have a statewide email list, which you could post if you are looking for something, and perhaps through those networks. I would also say that your local farm supply is going to likely know if there is a salvage yard or a business that specializes in repurposing old irrigation equipment.
What was the very first one you said, Colette?
In Moscow?
I think so.
Yes, we have a salvage yard it's owned by Karie.
Mm-hmm.
And
okay.
They have all different kinds of building supplies, and they do a lot of salvage. And so if you're in the Moscow area, that is a place that I would start. And if they don't carry it, they may know who does.
Great.
But again, I'm thinking that a lot of people are really using Facebook and Craigslist as well.
Thank you. Good.
Great. Well, thank you. We don't have any other questions that came in. That was a great presentation. We did have a couple people ask in the chat about the slide deck, and that slide deck will be available on the Cultivating Success website along with this recorded webinar. So if you go to this link that you see at the bottom, cultivatingsuccess.org, recorded webinars, you'll be able to find that tomorrow. When we launch out of today's webinar, there's a really quick, like 3-minute evaluation we would appreciate your completing about this webinar. And you can tell us, in addition to how this webinar answered your questions, what other topics would you like to see covered in Cultivating Success webinars? Upcoming webinars. So we have a couple of things happening that you can link to from our Cultivating Success website. Tonight, there is going to be a presentation by Iris Mays online about soil testing for vegetable gardening on March 3rd. So Wednesday, there is going to be another presentation on water-wise landscaping and particularly how to conserve water. For the rest of March, our theme is about insects, pest management, and pollinators. So we have 4 additional webinars coming up. Again, you can register here at cultivatingsuccess.org/webinar-series. And also to let you know, each of these webinars is recorded and will be available on our website. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Karie, for that great presentation. We hope to see you tonight or another day on a Cultivating Success webinar. Have a really great week. Enjoy the sunshine.